Strategic storytelling. Right now, I'm calling this the missing link between your marketing and your impact. I could probably change this to how to ethically press all of the buttons on the behavioral control panel after that talk, but ethically do it. So when I talk about strategic storytelling, there's two things I want to make clear. One, it is strategic, which means it is designed to reach a goal. You are doing something for the purpose of reaching a goal. And storytelling, well, it may be not the kind of thing you're thinking of when I talk about storytelling. This is not about narrative arc. This is not about the hero's journey. But I am going to start with a story, and I am going to have a hero, and his name is Bob. Bob is your typical B2B buyer. Bob's CEO has just read a magazine article about how companies who have not adopted AI are falling behind. And so he has tasked Bob with adopting AI. So Bob is about to go on a journey. Now, Bob knows he will not be alone. Generally speaking, these kinds of decisions involve minimum 4 people. If it's a big decision, a big company, upwards of 20. Bob also knows it will not be a short journey. You're in it for a couple of months. On average, it's going to take about a year before this decision actually gets made. What does that year look like? Well, they're going to spend about 70% of their time in the selection phase. This is when they are going out saying, here's all of our needs, here are the people who could possibly meet them, and they're creating their short list. At the top of that short list is someone they think is probably the best fit. And then they enter the validation phase, which is when they start going to all of the vendors and actually figuring out what lines up and getting the story from them. Now, this line makes it look very simple and straight. As we learned from past presentations yesterday, it is not. It is a jumping around, lots of touch points. They're checking out Reddit, they're checking out other people in their industry, they are thinking together, all of the research that is going on, long journey, complicated, and this point is when they actually want to talk to you. The people who actually did this study, 6 Sense, said you cannot bully your way into the pole position. You can't make it so that you are number one by reaching out in that first phase. He wants to talk to you when he is ready to talk to you, and that is at the point of validation, the back 30%. How is Bob making this decision? Now, we would like to think, and Bob would like to think, that he is being very rational. From everything we just learned this morning, not so much. When you look at the reasons why Bob makes decisions, why he purchases a specific product, the business value that comes from it represents kind of a small portion of that decision making. In fact, most people aren't able to tell apart the vendors based on the business value, nor are they willing to pay any sort of extra amount for companies that deliver on more of those. What does Bob actually want? Well, if you look at the personal value, that's going to make a difference. Personal value is what's in it for Bob. And when you start studying Bob's reaction to whether or not this is going to be good for his career, how people think of him, what does he feel about the vendors, it will increase their likelihood of making the purchase, and it will increase their likelihood of paying more. Now, Bob will never admit that, because Bob is a rational guy. Bob would never want to say to anybody that he has made this decision without being logical about it. But if you look at Bob's behavior, it's going to tell you a different story. So this is a really interesting study done by Bain Consulting. It is specific to B2B. They did one for B2C too, if you're in that arena, where they looked at all of the ways in which people see value in the people that they are purchasing from. Now, that value pyramid is a lot bigger than you think. It is not just the functional benefits. There's emotional benefits to it too. If you ask a B2B buyer why they are loyal to a specific company, they're going to give you a response like cost reduction. But if you, like Bain Consulting did, compare their NPS scores, which is a way to measure loyalty, whether or not they believe that this company is worth sharing with their friends, with the scores that they have given to all of the companies on the many different measures of value, you will see that the companies that scored the highest in loyalty aren't necessarily scoring that because of the functional benefits. Now, the first three are pretty obvious, and I think that all makes sense. They want the product to work. But look what's in position number 4, hope. Hope that your company is going to do great because of this vendor. Does anybody ever think that hope enters a B2B decision? Probably not. Where is cost reduction? Out the window in position number 27. But like I said, Bob, our hero, wants to believe he has made this decision for the right reasons. So he's not going to admit why he chose the vendor he chose. So back to our hero's journey. Who does Bob actually choose when he finishes all of this work after his year with all of his band of merry decision makers? Well, 81% of the time, they go with the company they had decided at the end of the first phase. 30% of their effort talking to all of their vendors lands them back with the one they'd already said, I think that's the winner. So if anyone wasn't paying attention, let's review the story of Bob. Bob is making a decision for an entire enterprise, but he is thinking about personal reasons as well as business ones, and the personal reasons count more. He will never admit that, and he's going to spend months of his time talking to a lot of people to bring him back to we were right in the first place. The presentation from this morning might already tell you why that makes sense, but I will give you my little nugget, the short story. We can be rational, but we are better at rationalizing. Rationalizing is the capacity to create a story that allows us to believe we are being rational. Now, I don't think anyone guessed we would have so much science in storytelling presentations. I am going to go into some of the science of this because I know that people might not just take this at face value. And this is going to dive a little bit deeper into one of the concepts that was brought up, System 1 and System 2, how your brain actually makes decisions. Now, if anyone is familiar with the book Thinking Fast and Slow, this is where this is coming from. It is actually from the body of work by Daniel Kahneman. He is the first psychologist to win a Nobel Prize in economics for all of his work in how people make decisions. And there's two things about this I want to say up front. One, this is a huge oversimplification of how your brain is functioning, but it is good enough for understanding the concept. And two, you do not toggle back and forth between System 1 and System 2. Everything is running all of the time. The question is, who's driving the bus? And as we learned this morning, 95% of the time, our System 1, which is fast, is the one that is in charge. System 2, much slower, and they operate in different ways. So System 1, you can think of it as the place that is accessing all of the data that's already in your brain. It is your instinct, it is your emotion, it is your experience. You are pulling from what you already know. That's why it's so easy and quick. System 2 is much slower because System 2 is going out to information gather, to make the list of companies that should be in there, to be logical and reasonable as much as it can be. What System 1 is looking for when it says, okay, I've done my job, the easiest plausible story. I'll give you an example. When I got to my hotel room, I found a cookie. Thank you to Progress for that. And as soon as I saw the cookie and picked it up, my brain said, this is a cookie, and classify it. I'm going to eat the cookie. And I gave myself all the reasons why I should eat this cookie, because cookies start going stale in like a few days. So I'd rather eat the cookie now than on Friday when I know I'm going to eventually eat it anyways. Also, I did not eat the cheesecake at the restaurant, so I've earned some kind of treat tonight. It was a hard flight, so I deserve a cookie. So system 1 has a story of here's the thing, here's what you should do about it, shoots it up to system 2, what do you think? And most of the time, system 2 is just like, rubber stamp, yes, cookie, let's do it. When does system 2 show up? When there is a complex scenario, a novel scenario, something where you can't actually access your brain and go, okay, I can put together a story here, or when the stakes are very, very high. It does have a fail-safe. It will switch off if you get hungry, though. So if you get hungry, you're tired, not a good thing for system 2. But other than that, it will show up and do the hard work for you. But if you go to prison and you have a parole hearing before lunch, statistically speaking, you are screwed. In this system 2, what is it trying to get to? A believable story. It is constructing a story where it can say, okay, I have done the work I need to do. This is a story that actually makes sense. Hey, system 1, how do you feel about that one? Good going, boss. Can anyone figure out what is missing in these descriptions? We have plausible, we have believable. What about correct? Yes. We don't have correct. Why? Because our brain will easily, gladly ignore facts, ignore figures, and put together the story that is plausible if we're doing something fast, or believable if we're actually going to the extra mile of figuring out with new information. Our system 2 is very capable of taking us to the very wrong conclusion. We can use our brain to do that, as long as we can get to a story that we can believe. Now, I think from some of what we talked about this morning, you might have an understanding of why, but I do find it helpful to put this into a little bit of context. Now, imagine that there is a caveman who is getting charged by a saber-toothed tiger. I'm pretty sure they exist at the same time. If that caveman stood there and went, is he coming for me, or is he going to eat Bob? Would that caveman survive? No. We had to act fast in order to survive. Speed was a function of reacting to the system we were in. Now, imagine that this caveman is walking down a path and he just starts eating every single berry that he sees. Is that caveman gonna survive? Probably not. The system that we are in, we can't always know what the conclusion will be from our actions. So we need something that will keep us safe even if there's uncertainty. So our system is actually designed to work within a system that requires speed, that requires some efficiency, and that is, by its very definition, most of the time, more about probability than certainty. We just need to get to something that is efficient, low risk, and satisfactory. That is the best way to survive. Now, we have a lot of shortcuts that enable us to do this even better. They are called cognitive biases or heuristics, or what I like to call them, shortcuts. And there's 188 of them, and you do not need to know every single one of these. I just want you to understand how many we've got in our brain. And then I will quickly tell you the ones that you need to know. If you're to sum up all of the things that our brain is doing to enable us to get to this efficient, low-risk, satisfactory result, there's 3 things to remember. a voice in our head is yelling, take the easy path. Don't go down the road that is very, very hard for you because it knows that that is going to be less efficient than going down the easy one. Obvious, right? Stick with what you know. Now, we don't like change. We heard about that this morning, but why do we not like change? If we don't stick with what we know, two things happen. One, we have to spend energy learning something new. Or we have to rewrite, worse, the code that is in our brain. And both of those things take time, take energy, and add risk. So our brain tells us, just stick with the thing that you know, and you will be better off. You might not be, but you'll probably get to a satisfactory result. The last thing, you are correct. Now, I always find it interesting that we have a whole bunch of shortcuts in our brain that are there only to say, good job, buddy, you found the answer. But there's a reason for that. If we don't get to that answer, we will never move on to the next decision. How strong is this instinct? We actually have a stronger stress response in our brain when we are faced with uncertainty than if we are faced with certain pain. Meaning, you could say to someone, I'm going to punch you in the face right now, and their brain will be less stressed out. The fear circuits will not light up as strongly as they do if you say, one day I'm going to show up and punch you in the face. Don't do either of those things, by the way, but it illustrates the point. Our brain is trying to keep us efficient, away from risk, and getting to a result that's going to be good enough. Because we have to, as we've found out, make thousands of decisions in a day. And if we actually try to find the perfect answer to all of them, I'm sure you've all heard, perfect is the enemy of good. It's a problem that I have. You will never get through everything. You will never get out the door in the first place, but you will end up having a worse result in the long run. This is the safe play for a system that is what we live in now, probabilities, not perfection. What does this actually mean for your marketing, though? I'm going to get into the strategic storytelling part. I want you to go back to that decision, the story that we are actually trying to make. You can think of this as 3 tasks your brain has. You have to classify the thing, you have to evaluate what it is, and then you have to validate the response. If you look at that in terms of goals, we need clarity, we need connection, and we have to get to confidence. Now, translated into the marketing, translated into what your customers are thinking when they interact with you or your brand, what are you? How does that fit with me? And why should I trust you? So this is the main thing that every brand needs to be able to progress their customers through in order to get them to the confident, satisfactory, but feeling like it's the right decision results. I'm going to jump into each one of them and give you some thoughts on what you have to absolutely remember, what it is that you can do to win in this scenario, and again, ethically press the buttons on the behavioral control panel. Looking at clarity first, you need to understand that classifying is not the same thing as full comprehension. If somebody walks up to you at a party and says, so, what's your story? Do they want the 24-hour documentary that starts at birth? No. They're looking for the movie poster. They're looking for the key facts to understand what is this thing that just showed up in their documentary. So you're not going to put in your bio, I have a 99% win rate on Wordle. I'm going to find a way to work it into a presentation, but I'm not going to put it in a bio. And I'm going to remember that all of those kinds of facts to the person I am trying to convince is just noise that distracts them from the clarity they are trying to get to. They don't want noise, they want a story. I'll give you some examples of what I mean by a story. Is anyone old enough to remember when people would say, nobody ever got fired for buying IBM? That's the story. Okay, how about Steve Jobs in a black turtleneck? He was too creative to wear a tie every day, but he still wanted to be wearing something that was highly functional and worked really well. What does that sound like to you? Apple, that's a story. Stories are not just facts. It is not a list of features. It includes feelings in all of those too. And you would be amazed at what little it takes for our brain to lock in that nugget of information that to it is the clarity story. Let's run a test. I'm going to say one word, Cybertruck. Now, whichever way that went for you, and I know it can go both ways, you probably, with that word, pulled in a whole bunch of information that was not just facts about a car, but also feelings about a brand. That is a story. Now, the way to win with a story is with ease of processing. There's a lot of ways that you can do that. I think we all know enough to know that you can't just throw up a wall of jargon at clients who have no idea what AI is. Like me, I learned a lot yesterday about AI. You also can't win just by being clever. Clear will beat clever every single time. So when you're thinking about marketing, if you are distracting from their ability to get to the story, you are not making it easy for them to process and classify who you are. There are some fun cognitive biases around this too. For example, the Keats heuristic. We believe things more if they rhyme, no pain, no gain. And we will always pick whatever option we understand the quickest. So now they have classified you. They have clarity. What are they moving on to next? Connection. Understand that our brains are pattern matching literally everything. Now, I've told you that the cognitive biases we have, the shortcuts we have, are there in order to get our mind to choose what information it will include in the story. But we are like a detective looking for all of the information to put that story together. We cannot just ignore things without processing them first. There's three things that we might find on this journey of putting together the story. Evidence, which is like a real factual thing that they should probably be looking at. It is the features that your clients have on their list of here's what you need to show us you have in order to get in the door. But they're also going to see clues. Clues are things that, like, okay, maybe it's related, it's going to lead you in a direction, but it's not necessarily the hard fact, the rational decision. And then they're also going to see red herrings. Has everybody heard the term of a red herring before? Okay, a red herring is a thing that you think is a clue and it's not. It has absolutely nothing to do with the end result. So, for example, if you have a client who is trying to purchase an AI solution from you, I know AI is so, I'm making it so simple, but that's how my brain is working with it. That's as far as I can go with it. And he says, I like pickleball. And you go, I like pickleball too. Trust me, that is going to end up in his decision-making process. It has nothing to do with anything about the solution, but our brain is going to pattern match everything and look for whatever connection it can find that will construct its final story. So be aware of that. Make it easy for them to check all of those boxes. You can do this in a few ways. Having your solution compared to something that they actually do understand, enables them to go from, I've got to figure out something new and different, to, oh, okay, I'm now back in the easy system one of processing. I'm sure everyone has heard someone say, oh, it's the Uber of bleh, or it's the office, but for, and there's like 5 different things are now the office, but for something else. When we take information that is new and novel and we connect it back to something that they understand, it is easy for them to check the box of connection. You also have to make sure that you are hitting all of the table stakes. Sometimes when people are approaching marketing, they think that, oh, well, I don't have to talk about like the regulatory compliance, the stuff that everybody definitely has. I should only focus on the thing that makes me super unique. Table stakes are table stakes for a reason. If anyone plays poker, I don't, but I did Google this. Table stakes are the requirement for showing up and being in the game. Make it easy for them to check the box that you have done that job. How do you win at this game? Alignment. Alignment is one end of a scale of connection. The start of that scale is what marketers would call mirroring. If you can remember this was happening a bit more 10 years ago when they would just say, oh, you know what? We should start putting people in ads that look like the people we're selling to. That's mirroring. It's when you can show up at a website and be like, oh, look, that I can see me there. That's mirroring. Alignment takes it to another level. It is when they can say, not just you serve me, it is you understand my fears, you understand what I want, and more importantly, you're not just on the outside saying, here's this thing I'm trying to sell you. You are in my circle with me. My beliefs and your beliefs are aligned. When you can show alignment, you're going to a level that will, again, ethically light up the part of the brain that says, I'm connected to this and this brand. It represents who I am. And I would argue that in today's day and age, it is almost impossible to exist as a brand and not have your customers try and connect something beyond what the product is to your company. Everybody wants to understand the story of the brands that they're working with. Confidence. When we get into the level of confidence, you have to understand that it is about trust, and trust is a personal thing. If you want your customers to trust you, know that every single one of them has their own threshold of what trust is and looks like. When I talked about in the beginning, people trying to get to confidence in their system 2 thinking, that's when they'll stop and say, I've done enough. That threshold will vary. If you have, for example, a group of CEOs who have always been able to trust their gut and always win and no one's ever said no to them, what kind of level of confidence do they need? Is it a whole bunch of facts and information, or is it just, I gotta make sure that they believe that their gut is right? If you have someone more like me who needs to understand every little detail of everything, getting to the trust point is making sure that that information to the level that I need is available when I need it. Now, we already know, going back to that journey, that the trust doesn't come at the point of them reaching out to you to have the conversation. You need to be building that trust in the 70% of the time that they are going through the evaluation phase, which means that the trust has to happen even when you are not involved. You don't get to be a part of that story, but you can give them all of the signals that they need, all of the information that they need to get to their personal threshold of trust. What does that actually look like? There's signals of trust that people can use that don't necessarily have anything to do with the product. Again, that is the connection that's coming through. There are signals of trust that are borrowing trust from other people. That is what social proof can do. That is what having reviews on your website, having people on Reddit talk about you as a thought leader, having people in the industry who are well known mention your product and say is good. All of those things are signals of trust that are outside of your ecosystem, but that are going to influence people and build the trust. How can you build the trust in ways that you have full control? Because a lot of those things you don't necessarily have control over. The best thing that you can do is have consistency. You can win with consistency. Now, if you imagine this journey, as we know, having 800 touch points, consistency is having someone show up on your website, on the bottom of a product page, on an ad that they see online, and always seeing the same story. When we see the same story over and over and over again, we believe, we trust, we have confidence. What happens when the story changes on us? Okay, let's go back to the Cybertruck. Rewind 10 years. Everybody probably had kind of a picture in their mind of what Tesla was. You had the story. Fast forward a little bit of a plot twist. Things kind of changed. How did that make everyone feel about their confidence in the brand? The story changed. It changed our view of whether or not it was going to show up one way or the other, and decreased trust and confidence. So showing up in the same way over and over again, with every little detail that you can, enhances trust and confidence even before they've had one conversation in the room with you. It enables you to make sure that when they do reach out for the let's have our conversation talks, it is not, okay, tell me more about you. It's you had me at hello. We've figured this out. Now, these three pieces of your story are going to come together and still feed into each other. A lot of this is all overlapping. But if you just remember the three things that you need to achieve, the clarity, the connection, and the confidence across all those touch points, it changes how people are actually going to figure out who their brand is and whether or not they want to work with you. It changes the role of marketers. So we used to think that we could just loudly and persistently tell them everything that was about us. Hey, let me give you a sheet of everything that is great about me and pass it over, and then you can decide what we're doing. That's not how it's happening anymore with a touch point system that is running 10 points sideways and doesn't involve you till the end, and by the time you get there, they've already made the decision. You need to be able to give them all of the clues that they need to start constructing their story so that along this journey, when they come back to you, they've basically convinced themselves.
So this would help me market our product and stuff. But after sales and things like that, how do I create like emotional support software so they keep coming back to me and I help them emotionally with my stuff?
So right, everything that I've talked about here is the point of I've gotten you in the door, right? So there is a whole other thing of how to make the loyalty loop happen. The thing that I always like to tell people, satisfaction, and this is a very easy equation, satisfaction is expectations minus results. So anything you have promised If you deliver on that promise, they will be happy. If you give them something that they did not expect, or you've said, I'll do this thing, but then you actually don't quite deliver on it, that will lead to less satisfied customers. So being honest and transparent about what you can and can't do, making sure that they have a full picture of what it is that they can get from working with you, that is going to be the thing that will keep them happy and satisfied and moving forward with, like, let's keep doing this over and over again. Your story has never changed. My story is never going to change. I can fully have trust and confidence in you, and so I will keep on moving forward. But if you have done anything where the story from the point of I've come in the door to, okay, now I'm actually working with you, if it differs from what they expected, you're going to lose. People do not want the story to change. They've already made the decision. They just want to know that they've made the right decision. So keep validating that they've made that right decision. Now, Neil made a really interesting point about this yesterday. He talked about when clients were having some challenges, instead of wanting to tell you that they were having challenges, they would just walk away. So I want to make sure that it is also clear. They're not going to come to you and say, hey, you messed up from the store, you didn't do as you were promising. Do not expect your clients to give you a chance and be transparent. They're probably just going to walk away because there's going to be other options out there. But know that if you haven't delivered on something, they're not going to be happy. And you can do things like send them tea and cookies to make sure that they will be able to, if you can fix any of the errors you've made in terms of delivering that response.